This program is produced in partnership with the Center for Sacramento History. Funding provided by the Sacramento History Foundation.
You will hear testimony from the gentleman that I have a great deal of admiration for in the next few days. The gentleman is from Sacramento. His name is Nathaniel Colleyi. Nathaniel Colleyi is a black lawyer. He was former general counsel of the NAACP. He was born in Alabama, came to Sacramento, opened up his law practice, and became truly one of the prominent lawyers in the United States.
See, when an unknown comes before you, somebody has to go ahead of him and warn you that somebody is coming and describe it. When you come to the President of the United States, they just say, "Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States." A country lawyer from Sacramento comes, you need a big press release, a congressman to tell how great you are, and all the rest.
Describing himself as a country lawyer, it's like we all look back on ourselves of where we came from. And for him, he's still that guy that came from Alabama. He saw himself as a small town guy, but he was playing in the big leagues. There's no question about that.
I was born in rural Alabama, and I represent, I think, something special in America, and that is you can come from anywhere and go anywhere if you really try. And I came from rural Alabama, where I was unfit for picking cotton from the very outset. First, we're going to have to lay the facts on the line. About the existence of discrimination in housing. We're going to have to educate the public to the fact that it is an existing thing which is a real problem. And the Supreme Court said that a state must use all of its resources in every reasonable manner to achieve desegregation. In some communities, a bus is the only reasonable way to achieve it. But all things being equal, I think under some circumstances, we're going to have some sort of compensatory or preferential program if we're going to close a gap which has occurred because of discrimination in the past.
Nathaniel Colleyi stood tall with the giants of the American Civil Rights Movement. During a 43-year law career that spanned 7 California governors and 9 U.S. presidents, he played a vital role in ending the discriminatory practices of many institutions. His life's work transformed the city of Sacramento, changed the state of California, and impacted the country as a whole.
Nat was a giant, there's no doubt about it. His impact was tremendous. When he walked into a room, he was the kind of person that people turned their heads and looked at.
You know, he integrated the police department, he integrated the fire department, he made it easier for teachers to get jobs right here.
Legally, he opened the doors and threw down a lot of the discriminatory practices that were present, not only in retail establishments, but something as just as benign as, say, going to a local swimming pool or a local skating rink. Those are the types of things that Nathaniel Colleyi made sure that access to those particular types of activities were available for blacks.
People forget that things like police, fire, schools, housing, employment were not integrated before, Nathaniel Colleyi. So when you think about the second half of the century in Sacramento, I can't imagine anybody having a greater footprint on our community than Mr. Colleyi.
Nathaniel Colleyi's life began nearly a century ago in the segregated South. He was born 20 miles outside of Selma, Alabama, the youngest of 6 children, raised in substandard housing by a widowed mother who recognized his unique talents early on and encouraged him to read books.
And she wanted Dad to be educated because he wasn't fit for, like he said, working in the field. He was very thin and he was sickly.
After graduating high school from nearby Snow Hill Institute, Nat Colleyi attended the Tuskegee Institute, where he met a young co-ed from California named Jerlene Jackson, who would soon become his wife and later convinced Nathaniel that her hometown of Sacramento would be a good place to live and work. As a student, he studied chemistry and was mentored by the famed scientist George Washington Carver. After graduating first in his class of 1941, Nathaniel Colley set out to become a chemist. But his experience in World War II changed the course of his life.
You will never know how much trouble it gave me to lead a black company in the Solomon Islands and in the Philippine Islands and in New Guinea, and people would ask me, why are all the people in your company black? And I also recognized the segregations and the evils of it. And I determined at that time that something had to be done about this. And so I made the bold move of deciding to go to law school.
Captain Nathaniel Colley returned to his home state after the war. He wanted to enter law school at the University of Alabama, but was turned away because he was black. Another door soon opened, this one in the Ivy League. And 2 years later, as the only African-American student in his class, Nathaniel Sextus Colley graduated from Yale Law School with honors. He and Jerlene then headed west to build their life together in California's capital city.
Hello? Won't you join us for a trip? A trip depicting life in Sacramento, 1950?
At that time, there was no black professional class to speak of, no large numbers of doctors, if any, lawyers, clerical workers. Most African Americans at that time worked in menial jobs. So these were the conditions, basically, that Nathaniel Colley, upon his arrival in Sacramento, found still in effect.
He was breaking ground coming into that. But the fact that he had a military service and he had a degree from Yale, I mean, that's very unusual. He's a very unique person.
He took the state bar test and he came in with the highest score. You know what that got him? It got him a job with State Board of Education to pack textbooks and wooden crates. But soon after, he had this reputation, and two Republican attorneys, Archibald Mull and Anthony Kennedy Sr., sponsored him before the Sacramento Bar.
And in fact, they encouraged me to apply for membership in the American Bar Association. And of course, I was accepted. You'll have to remember that at the time I'm talking about, black members were not welcome to the Los Angeles Bar Association. But in Sacramento, my welcome was complete and total from the beginning.
He was a huge factor in the civil rights movement here in California. It was focused a lot around fair housing, and he became a big part of that.
With the backing of the local chapter of the NAACP, Sacramento's only black attorney moved quickly, using the courtroom as a tool to break down the inherent segregation and restrictive covenants that existed throughout Sacramento and across California. The Colley family itself showed remarkable courage during their early years in Sacramento. They even integrated their own neighborhood.
When they integrated Southland Park in 1955, that was a very difficult time for the family because we faced a lot of opposition, you know, going to school and just residing in the neighborhood. We had boxes burned on front of the house, epithets yelled at the house and at us, and it was a difficult time.
And I have difficulty believing that an overwhelming majority of the people in California really would prefer to have a system of housing discrimination where people buy houses according to their race instead of according to their economic ability to pay. So now, of course, the theory behind fair housing is that nobody is to be discriminated against. All fair housing does is try to make housing available to all people on an economic basis without regard to race, color, or creed. It seems to me this is fundamental in the American system, but somehow we have not been able to sell that idea to people.
The decade-long struggle to end discrimination in housing included many landmark lawsuits initiated by Nathaniel Colley. One of them, Ming versus Horgan, involved a group of Sacramento realtors who were engaging in racial restrictions while at the same time receiving federal money. Colley won the suit, successfully arguing the first housing case in American history that said the mere receipt of federal funds made it illegal to discriminate.
It was more important in many ways than any discrimination, say at a lunch counter or at a water fountain, as was the case in the South. Because housing is a basic fundamental access into the economic power that most Americans require to be successful in this country.
Fighting for equal access in education was also fundamental to Nathaniel Colleys. In 1960, California Governor Pat Brown appointed him to the State Board of Education, the first African American to be so named. There, Colleys got textbooks changed, insisting that the accomplishments of blacks be properly reflected. And in the courtroom, he successfully fought for the integration of California's public schools.
Because the State Department of Education issued statistics, which are current statistics, showing that there are still literally hundreds, if not thousands, of racially imbalanced schools in the state of California. That's as of 1971. So if this is the case, then we feel that the State Board of Education ought to exercise its statutory and constitutional powers and come forward with a broad desegregation plan for the whole state of California.
As Colleys' stature grew, so did his profile beyond Sacramento. He was a national director of the NAACP for over 30 years.
But knowing public officials, knowing politicians, knowing school boards and legislatures, I think you're going to find that individuals like myself and organizations like the NAACP are going to have to try to keep us on the constitutional path. I'm amused by all the people who talk about law and order, but every time they get a chance, they try to sneak in something to prevent law and order.
When you think about the NAACP, a lot of times they get credit for the defensive side of what they do. But I think Nathaniel Colleys realized you also have to be on offense, the advancement of a group of people, and I think he did that very effectively.
In anything to deal with equal rights, we have to act now because we can't wait and think that somebody else is going to do this for us. And a number of his speeches address that, and that's what he was calling for. We are in a democracy, we are here to participate, and the time to do that is now, not in the future, but act now.
Colleys served on statewide and national commissions as well. In 1976, Governor Jerry Brown appointed him chair of the California Horse Racing Board. Colleys also represented the U.S. at conferences and summits around the world, and he was special advisor to several presidents, most notably John F. Kennedy, with whom he had formed a friendship.
He was on a plane when President Kennedy was assassinated, and that was very difficult for him because he had formed such a bond with him, and he was able to, President Kennedy would listen, and they could set an agenda for what they wanted to do.
And knowing somebody like Nathaniel Colleys, particularly because he was from a different part of the country, he wasn't someone coming out of the South, he was a whole nother voice, that really I think was very important that you show a unity in the country, that this is a cause that is not just isolated to the South. And I think Colleys was essential to that, to show the broader scope of civil rights in the United States as a whole. And I think he probably had a big influence on Kennedy with a lot of, changing his points of view.
In the wake of President Kennedy's assassination, Colleys wrote a piece for the Sacramento Observer called "He Killed Our Lincoln." It said in part, "Whenever I heard his voice or saw him on television, a great feeling of pride surged through me, not only because my friend was speaking, but mainly because I knew his was the voice that spoke for men everywhere who yearn for freedom and human dignity without regard to race, creed, or color. When this man spoke, America sang its most beautiful anthem."
100 years of delay have passed since President Lincoln freed the slaves, yet their heirs, their grandsons, are not fully free. They are not yet freed from the bonds of injustice.
And what is it that America has failed to hear?
Less than 5 years after President Kennedy's assassination, the most famous icon of the civil rights movement, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., was gunned down on April 4th, 1968. On that day, Nathaniel Colleys talked at length about that tragedy and its impact on the country.
Mr. Colleys, what do you remember best about Dr. King?
That his belief in nonviolence was real and genuine, and his dedication to it was such that nothing could ever make him strike back.
Certainly in your meetings with Dr. King, you two would sit down and chat about the possibility of a tragedy such as this, would you not?
Well, not just the two of us, but in combination with a number of people. His response always was that he could not allow the threat of violence by others to condition his course of conduct. He had to do what he thought he had to do. And if it meant somebody might kill him, this was one of the prices and you would pay. But we have to understand that no movement as great as this movement, with its great momentum, can be carried out without a lot of people being irritated and a lot of people feeling threatened. And so people will act like this. It's a very great tragedy that they have to strike down a man who is really one of the great men of our times. But this will happen. But I personally don't think that this will result in any setback of race relations which will turn us back into the dark ages. I think the followers of Dr. King will understand that this is a job which must be done, and if it's to be a lasting solution and a lasting victory, it'll have to be done in love and understanding.
Throughout the 1960s, Colley's reputation as a champion of civil rights was widely known by those in high office, but he tended to downplay his achievements back home, often referring to himself as just a country lawyer from Sacramento.
He's always going to think of himself that way. He wasn't a New Yorker or anybody like that. He was a guy that came from a small town, and Sacramento was still a small town.
He had a provincial nature about him, and that's his way of doing it, and he would still want to take care of his indigenous clients.
But he was one of those people who could speak two languages. You know, he could speak and hang and break bread with the community, and then he can go dine with presidents of the United States and speak the language there. So I think for all of us, he was bilingual in his own way.
Nat wrote this to me, to Dan, my best friend, Nat Colley.
Longtime friend and colleague Dan Visnich marveled at Colley's gift for language. The two worked together on initiatives and legislation over the years, and Visnich saw firsthand Nathaniel's ability to perfectly choose his words.
He would get a pen and legal ruling paper and write something. Once in a while, I noticed he would scratch out one word or two. Now, when most people write, they're editing and re-editing. He didn't. He apparently wrote just the way he talked. And he had a wonderful vocabulary to use the right words.
We march for Mr. and Mrs. Harry T. Moore, who paid for freedom in the coin of life. We march for Reverend George Lee, who died because he dared to exercise his right as American citizen. We march for Medgar Evers, who made the supreme sacrifice to cleanse his land from bigotry and discrimination.
The classroom was another setting perfectly suited for Colley's talents. He taught judicial philosophy at the McGeorge School of Law for nearly 2 decades. In 1987, one of his colleagues at McGeorge, Anthony Kennedy, turned to his fellow Sacramentan when President Ronald Reagan nominated Judge Kennedy to the United States Supreme Court.
And Nat was asked to go back and testify on his behalf before Joe Biden's Senate Judiciary Committee, of which he was chair.
Mr. Colley, it's a distinct pleasure to have you here, and quite frankly, somewhat reassuring. You have been, if I'm not mistaken, president of or national bar. You have been a man of been deeply involved in civil rights issues all your life, and I'm anxious to hear what you have to say about this gentleman.
Thank you very much, Senator Biden. It's a pleasure for me to be here also, and I can assure you that I would not be here if I didn't have reasonable cause to believe that Judge Kennedy will be an outstanding member of the Supreme Court of the United States. Judge Kennedy embraces Brown versus School Board. He has said so many times. He's never said anything to the contrary. And so far as black people in America is concerned, that decision is our Magna Carta. And he who embraces it embraces us. And I want to return a symbolic embrace of Judge Kennedy and ask you to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Colley.
Colley's testimony carried great sway and influenced many of the senators.
A most fitting description of Judge Kennedy came from Mr. Nathaniel S. Colleys, Sr., who described Judge Kennedy as a grown man, but also a growing man. Mr. Colley disagreed with some specific decisions, and Mr. Colley characterized Judge Kennedy as a grown man who would grow more.
In the words of his longtime friend and distinguished lawyer, Nathaniel Colleys, a resident of Sacramento, California, there are substantial grounds for hope that once on the Supreme Court, Judge Kennedy will continue to be, in the words of Nathaniel Colleys, a growing man.
Anthony Kennedy became just the 5th nominee in U.S. history to be unanimously confirmed to the Supreme Court. Despite his endorsement, Colley would express disappointment at some of Justice Kennedy's early decisions in civil rights cases, but the two maintained a correspondence, and the new justice later wrote to his old friend, "Dear Nat, you are more than one of the great attorneys in the history of our bar. You are one of the most gifted of teachers. You have taught generations of attorneys and judges by an unparalleled example of decency, dedication, and passionate advocacy. It has been my great honor to know you and to have you as my teacher and friend."
They were peers. They were peers, and they respected each other very much. And the law is really what brought them together.
Early in 1991, Colley was diagnosed with brain cancer, and while he continued to work during his illness, the disease took his life on May 20th, 1992. His passing was noted across the country.
He was a modest man, so to have lived a good life, and he always talked about good works. That was very important to him.
I dearly loved him as a friend and his family, and I was always impressed with the way that he handled things.
In the years since his death, the far-reaching impact of Nathaniel Colley's life's work has carried on.
I think without a shadow of a doubt, and I don't think anyone would deny, that he paved the way for Sacramento to be the most diverse city in America.
In 2002, the Civil Rights Project at Harvard University identified Nat Colley's adopted hometown as the most integrated and diverse city in the United States.
Here's his handwritten notes, which he then later had typed up.
And in 2012, the documents from Colley's life and career became a permanent part of the city's history. The papers of Nathaniel and Jerlene Colley have been donated by their family to the Center for Sacramento History.
Oh, it's extremely important to us to have these papers because they represent an essential part of Sacramento history, but California history, because it does tell that story of civil rights. It places Sacramento, we are the most diverse city in the United States. Well, this is part of our diversity. And being able to tell that story is even more significant because we have his papers.
You know, here we have a Sacramentan who's made an impact nationwide, and so for us to have a collection like this is a great honor and privilege to be able to share that with researchers. So people can come in and look through the collection and see, you know, how strategic he was in playing a role in challenging legislation as well as court cases that had an impact across the country.
The center celebrated the gift of the Colley Papers with a special event highlighting his impact on the civil rights movement.
Colley's life is a great testament that one doesn't always need a social movement to affect profound change. You can do it in a variety of ways, like being a litigator.
And the event tonight was a great event honoring Nathaniel Colley, who was a mentor to all the black judges and lawyers in this town. And I think the center put on a show that was wonderfully received here today.
An online exhibit showcasing dozens of letters, photos, and other documents rounds out the center's collection of the Colley Papers.
I'm very thankful for the city for believing the center would be the best place to be a depository for all of his works, his collections, his memorabilia. That elevates, I think, Sacramento's ability to just recognize and appreciate one of his very own.
How long do you expect this legal battle to take?
Well, I don't know, but as I think that some general said, once we're prepared to fight on this line all winter, but we're prepared to fight on this line for many years if it takes that. But those of us who believe in the system are just going to try to make the system work. And if it won't work, then of course no one can say we didn't try to make it work.
To learn more about Nathaniel Colley, please visit the online exhibit at colley.omeka.net.